mean, ultimately, I think it was summer 2022. I think that after the way in which the party decided to uh, get rid of Boris Johnson without a real plan for a successor, haunted, the party has essentially been haunted since then.
Fred de Fossard, who was an advisor to Jacob Rees-Mogg when he was leader of the House and business secretary. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you for coming on. I mean, let's pick up on what Oliver Wright was saying there, first of all, about these allegations of three Conservative Party figures betting on the date of the general election before it was publicly announced. I mean, we talk a lot on this programme about perception versus reality in politics. In some ways, it almost doesn't matter if it's found that nothing went wrong. It's the stench, as Oliver Wright puts it there. It's the perception of people just taking advantage in the office that they're in.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with Ollie's analysis. He's always very astute, and I think he's entirely right. It's one of those things where you hear the first story, which came out around a week ago, and then followed by not one more, but two more. It is quite extraordinary, and you do get the sense of a political party which has entirely sort of lost control and is in freefall.
Mm.
For a conservative activist, conservative member, and former special advisor, it's very depressing to watch.
What have you made of well, first of all, let's talk about the election strategy. What have you
Mm.
made of it?
I think it's been rather strange. If we look at some of the good economic news which is finally coming out now, it makes the case that many people were saying for going later in the year anyway. Now, of course, there are many rumblings that has suggested that the reason why the Prime Minister went slightly earlier than expected was because the Rwanda deportation plan would have unraveled over the summer, and we would have had record boat crossings over the summer, which would have caused all manner of chaos on the Conservative benches. But putting that aside, the fact that there are serious numbers of economic improvements coming through, and now we're headlong into an election campaign where the Conservative Party seems to be in freefall and incapable of taking advantage of it, the entire strategy just seems very, very strange in that regard. Like incredibly strange, and it's hardly surprising that the Bank of England didn't cut interest rates, despite the figures suggesting they might, because it would be very, very extraordinary, in my view, for a bank to cut interest rates in the middle of an election campaign. These are surely the sort of things that a prime minister would have on his mind when considering to go to the polls, because after all, the decision was his and his alone. So it really is quite eccentric.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Actually, I hadn't thought about that, about the sort of the political
Mm.
ramifications of the Bank of England cutting interest rates during an election campaign.
Mm.
I mean, also just, I mean, if you just look at the missteps throughout, I know that Labour have been very cautious. They don't really want to say much that's going to rock the boat
Yeah.
because they've got such a huge poll leading, if the polls are to be believed. But if you look at what's happened, just, I mean, just a few things we go through. Rishi Sunak announced that there was going to be a general election while standing in the rain, not in an umbrella. He
Yeah.
visited the Titanic. He stood under an exit sign. We were told the other day, the first thing you should never do during an election campaign is stand under an exit sign if you're the Prime Minister. Of course, he left the D-Day commemorations early. I just, do you think that this is just bad luck, a series of bad luck that's affected them? Do you think it's just poor planning? It's got poor people around you? I mean, you know these people. What do you make of it?
I'm really not sure. To be honest, the succession of bad luck and bad photo ops reminds me a little bit of Ed Miliband in 2015, a sort of character who was always bumbling into disaster after disaster. Not just the famous bacon sandwich, but there was a brilliant picture of him peering through a sort of door of a hallway once, which added to the sort of sense of farce. The strategy's been really strange. I don't really understand why they haven't attacked Labour on detailed policy terms. Labour are being very risk averse, which I entirely understand why, because they're the front runner. But even if you went through the Labour Party manifesto, there are plenty of areas in which you could open up a seriously important dividing line. Even some of the policies that Rachel Reeves is pushing, like the National Wealth Fund, which on the surface level sound great, but when you dig into it in reality, it's going to mean the government is going to be opening up our pension funds, our ISAs, our investments, and spending them on favoured green projects. That should be the sort of thing that the Tory party should be pushing aggressively at middle class voters who might be worried about their assets under Labour. And we're not seeing any of that at all. Instead, we're seeing sort of a back and forth over £2,000 tax rise, and the Tory advert about the piggy bank. It just doesn't. It's a very, very strange approach, which doesn't seem to be either protecting the core vote successfully or being offensive enough on Labour to rattle Labour and rattle their cage.
One of the other challenges, we're told, is a lack of money, really. and
Yeah.
problems that is causing during this campaign. And presumably then that also reduces the choices that you can make during a campaign.
Yes, very true. I've heard that as well, and that is why there are far fewer social media ads that the party has used very successfully in previous election campaigns. I mean, the digital campaigning that the Tories waged successfully in 2015 and 2019 were incredible, and we haven't seen any of the sort of like counterintuitive sense of fun and mischief that they had in 2019. Whether it was the 2 hours of Boris Wave beats to get Brexit done videos that Topham Guerin put on YouTube, or the fact check UK thing that CCHQ did on Twitter, which caused an absolute riot. There isn't any of that sort of innovative, interesting thinking, and it might come down to money. Obviously, I think the party will do a big wave of social media spending much closer to polling day. I think that's expected. But I think your point about resources is very true, and we keep on seeing stories about donors leaving the party.
Where do you think things went wrong for the Tories?
We well, I mean, ultimately, I think it was summer 2022. I think that after the way in which the party decided to get rid of Boris Johnson without a real plan for a successor, the party has essentially been haunted since then because it doesn't really know what it has tried to do. The leadership election of summer 2022 was pretty acrimonious and divided the parliamentary party, and it was unable to come together either under Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. And obviously, look, I'm not going to hold a candle to Boris necessarily. He was leader with many flaws, and you could see the sort of way in which his administration was unraveling. But I think that is ultimately the moment.
Too much of a surge to the right as well?
I'm not quite sure. I think there's an interesting debate about this. I think it's a case sometimes of mistaking rhetoric over action. I think actually, in terms of raw policy terms, the party hasn't really moved to the right, but its leadership has said it is, and I think that's kind of alienated everybody. So you have people like Chris Skidmore furious with the Prime Minister's watering down of some net zero requirements, but then you have right-wing voters furious that the net zero requirements exist in the first place. So you kind of put stuck in a rock and a hard place, and exactly the same thing is seen on immigration. So we've had Home Secretary after Home Secretary talking really tough about the boats and sending people back and deportations. Yet in reality, the actual numbers, more people keep coming in and fewer people getting deported. So you can see that, yeah, the rhetoric annoys some people, and then the lack of action annoys others, and in the end, you've irritated everybody.
Fred, really good to speak to you. I'm sure we'll speak again. That's Fred de Fossard, former special advisor to Jacob Rees-Mogg when he was leader of the House and business secretary. Really interesting. Dia's got in touch saying she believes very poor advisors standing in the rain, an exit sign. I think I have more intelligence than them. They're numpties.
Let's get reaction now from Joe Mays, UK politics reporter for Bloomberg. Morning, Joe.
Good morning.
Who fared best in your opinion?
I mean, I didn't have a standout winner, but I think that, perhaps Keir Starmer and Ed Davey were the better on the night. I think that, as has been the case with these Q&A sessions through this campaign, Rishi Sunak had a pretty tough time of it, especially with questions like, are you not embarrassed to be leading the Conservative Party into this campaign? That's quite a tough one to hear. And then also, as you say, challenged over the gambling allegations. So that was pretty tough. But no, you're right. Keir Starmer also faced hard questions, as you mentioned, around Corbyn there. But I think that he was quite, upfront and astute when challenged on his previous commitments, such as tuition fees, for example, and why he's had to make changes. I think those were decent moments for him. Ed Davey, too, challenged over his connection to the post office scandal in the past, but also, coming through those questions, not too damaged. So I think that, I'd say Starmer and Davey probably had the best of it.
Yeah, it wasn't the greatest of days for Rishi Sunak to be doing it. I suppose there hasn't really been a great day in the Tory campaign so far. These gambling allegations, how damaging could they be for the Conservatives?
I think they're very damaging. I think that Rishi Sunak is trying to move on from the idea that the Conservative Party has been a party that has led the country poorly, and its ethics have been undesirable at times in the last few years, to put it mildly. But then to have something like this come out, it just really reinforces that perception that Sunak's tried to move on from. And it has the air of what could effectively just be corruption. I mean, these are things that are being investigated. These are allegations at this point, but it's certainly a very bad look.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to Tim Montgomery, Conservative commentator on Times Radio last night, speaking to John Pienaar, and he was saying he understands there could be more cases to come. So this could just build and build and get even worse for Downing Street. Let's talk about Keir Starmer, because I think one of the interesting things about Question Time last night was he seemed more open about his past support for Jeremy Corbyn than he has up until now. Previously, he's been quite evasive. He's used language such as, oh, well, I never expected him to win, which isn't necessarily the most convincing answer. This time around, he said, well, look, I think he would have made a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. Is that a deliberate strategy, do you think, Joe, to change approach to that question? Because he is being asked it a lot.
Yeah, I think he can see that it does look evasive the way that he has been answering it previously. And I think there is a desire there to be, seem to be a bit more honest. And I think that the formulation of words he kept with last night, I think he'll be happier with, in that he's trying to draw that comparison with Boris Johnson. I mean, he still didn't quite explicitly answer it with the clarity you might want. Pressed on it as we heard in the clip, but yeah, I think that he is trying to avoid any sense of being an evasive character, and he has to therefore come up with more forthright answers, like he tried to do last night.
Now, something else we should mention, it was the Times CEO Summit in London yesterday. The INEOS founder, Sir Jim Ratcliffe, was there. He was very critical of Labour's net zero plans. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, also attended. But Rachel Rees was fascinating because she gave more detail about Labour's plan to charge VAT on private school fees. What did she say?
Yeah, and this is a policy that has been concerning many parents. The Labour Party has been attacked over it. I mean, what she said was that that policy will not come in until 2025 at the earliest, and it won't be applied retrospectively. So that might, I think, allay some concerns of parents. So I think that means that the VAT could come in at the earliest in January, but Labour is probably expected to bring it in September at the start of the new school year. So I think that's a bit of extra detail which we didn't have before, and might provide some comfort to parents who are worried about that policy.
Just finally, Joe, zooming out a bit, looking at where we are in the election campaign now, less than 2 weeks to go until polling day. Well, this time in a fortnight, we'll probably know who's going to be the next Prime Minister, what the next government will look like. What is your sense of things? Clearly, Labour have this huge lead. We've had some dire opinion polls for the Conservatives this week. Can anything change the course of this election from here? Or have most voters essentially now made up their mind?
The polls are very static, and we do get the sense they're on kind of inevitable path to what looks like a Labour victory. I mean, there's still time in this campaign, so we could still have some major gaffe, we could still have some major embarrassing moment for one of the party leaders. I mean, Keir Starmer will be trying to play it very cautious, I think, to avoid that kind of moment. But yeah, short of something like that, I think it feels like we know where this is heading. Things happen in election campaigns, and you can never call it over until the votes are cast. So, there's still time, but I think we know where this is heading.